We have an absolutely incredible program for you this afternoon. To begin with, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce, I knew there was a word there, I just couldn't find it. Introduce Megan Vandermoss, Lieutenant Colonel at the United States Naval Academy. Megan is from Brush Prairie, Washington. Pardon me? What did I say? Well, I meant to say the United States Air Force Academy. Megan.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. Steve Ritchie is the only Air Force Academy fighter pilot ace, the only Air Force pilot ace in over 65 years, and the only American pilot ever to down 5 MiG-21 enemy fighter airplanes. He flew over 800 hours of combat during 339 missions in Southeast Asia. He is the 1973 winner of the McKay Trophy for the most significant Air Force mission of the year and numerous other awards. Veteran Tributes ranks General Ritchie as the 5th most decorated living American of all time. He was a member of the 1963 Falcon Football Gator Bowl team and the Air Force Academy class of 1964. We now have a 3.5-minute video to further introduce our speaker.
Brigadier General Steve Ritchie, United States Air Force. Brigadier General Steve Ritchie is an accomplished pilot, businessman, and motivational speaker. As a command pilot with more than 4,000 flying hours, including 800 in combat, General Ritchie is the first and only Air Force pilot ace since the Korean War, and the only American pilot in history to down 5 MiG-21s. Born in Reidsville, North Carolina, Steve Ritchie was an honor student and football standout as a high school quarterback. Ritchie entered the Air Force Academy in 1960, graduating in '64 with a BS in engineering science. While there, he was a football walk-on and made the team as a starting halfback for the Falcons, playing his final game in the 1963 Gator Bowl. Ritchie then entered pilot training at Laredo, Texas, and graduated first in his class. His initial assignment was at Eglin Air Force Base, Florida, flying F-104 Starfighters. In 1968, Ritchie served as an F-4 aircraft commander at Da Nang Air Base, Vietnam, where he flew the first F-4 Fast Forward Air Controller mission in Vietnam. He was instrumental in the spread of the FAST FAC program throughout Southeast Asia. It proved to be one of the most successful operations of the entire conflict. In 1969, he completed the Air Force Top Gun Fighter Weapons School in the Phantom and became one of the youngest instructors in the history of the school. Ritchie volunteered for a second tour in Southeast Asia in 1972 and compiled an aviation record that will likely never be equaled. He shot down a MiG-21 on May 10th and another on May 31st. He downed 2 more MiG-21s on July 8th in a classic low-altitude dogfight that lasted 89 seconds. Steve was victorious again on August 28th while flying his 339th combat mission, making him the Air Force's first and only pilot ace since the Korean War, and the only American pilot in history to down 5 MiG-21s. At the urging of Senator Barry Goldwater, then Major Ritchie left active duty in April 1974 to run for U.S. House of Representatives from his home state of North Carolina. Thereafter, he worked as special assistant to Joseph Coors for the next 6 years and was promoted to lieutenant colonel while serving in the Colorado Air National Guard. Ritchie transferred to the Air Force Reserves in 1985, holding positions in the Pentagon. In 1994, he was promoted to Brigadier General and served as mobilization assistant to the Commander of Air Force Recruiting. In 1997, Ritchie flew an active-duty F-4E Phantom at the Air Force 50th Anniversary Show and has flown the only privately owned Phantom more than 100 times at air shows and special events. He is currently the only pilot to be FAA type-rated in the F-104 Starfighter, more than 40 years after having flown the world's fastest low-altitude jet. Today, General Ritchie travels, speaking about aviation, national security, and America's free market system as president of Steve Ritchie Associates, Inc. Brigadier General Ritchie is one of the most decorated pilots in Air Force history, having been awarded the Air Force Cross, 4 Silver Stars, 10 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and 25 Air Medals.
My mother did a nice job on the film, don't you think? Let's see. I think we got a picture of Mom here. I wish she had lived long enough to see. She would have believed every word of it. Now, Dad, who was in Patton's Third Army in World War II, I'm not so sure about Dad, but I know Mom would have. I want to thank Megan and the film for not telling the score of that Air Force Carolina football game in the Gator Bowl of '63. No one here remembers it. I've been trying to forget it for 54 years, 9 months, and 25 days. I was a halfback out here at the Air Force Academy. This last game took place against one of my home state teams, University of North Carolina, and I thought that'd be the greatest way in the world to end 11 years of organized football. Well, as tradition would have it, after the game, they gave us a watch. It had a little football and an alligator in the middle of it. Every time I looked at mine, it read 35-0. That was the score of the ball game, folks. I don't blame you for not laughing. I didn't think it was too funny either. Now, that season was not a total loss. We don't have any Nebraska fans here that would admit it, do we? Any big Red fans? That's good, because you wouldn't like this story. We, meaning this little Air Force team, traveled to Lincoln, Nebraska, the fall of '63, about mid-October. Nebraska was undefeated and in the top 10. We were unranked. We didn't have a chance of being ranked. We're outweighed over 50 pounds per person. We won that game in the last 2 minutes. Now think about it. To beat the Big Red in Lincoln, when they're undefeated and in the top 10, we ought to get out of town in a hurry. It's the only game Nebraska lost, '63 season. They beat Auburn in the Orange Bowl. They ended up number 5 in the nation. We denied them the national championship. Some people like to applaud at this point. What the hell is it, after lunch or something? By the way, we're already 15 minutes behind schedule, and I've got 2 hours of notes. So we're going to have to compromise here somehow. So regarding that football game, the impossible is sometimes possible. There was no way. We had absolutely no chance. It was totally impossible, and somehow we did it. The impossible is sometimes possible, and that's what I want to talk to you about. You are already proving it day in and day out. Our military has proved it year in and year out over the years. If not, we wouldn't be here. Listening to the Wounded Warrior program last night, as I've done many times, but I don't know, for some reason last night I was more touched and more moved than ever before. Talking about the impossible being possible. They prove it. And they're such an inspiration and such an example of who we are and what we're about and what can be achieved by the human spirit. There are about a dozen subjects that I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to tell you about the greatest lesson that Dad taught me when I was 9 years old. One of the greatest lessons of combat leadership by Colonel Charlie Gabriel, our wing commander at UDARN in 1972, ended up being Chief of Staff of the Air Force. About the transformation of Eldridge Cleaver. About the most courageous political statement I've ever heard by Senator Jim Inhofe, who is an active senator today, when he was mayor of Tulsa, Oklahoma, back in the 70s. The 8th of July, 1972, when we were lucky enough to down 2 MiG-21s in a minute and 29 seconds. The Roger Locker rescue, one of the great rescue stories of all time. Admiral Hyman Rickover, the most impressive high school. I've been in over 150 high schools across America, high school junior ROTCs. And the most impressive was in Augusta, Georgia. And there's an important lesson there that I wish we had time to tell you why. One of the subjects is why I like rich people. Why I like rich people. Well, you've never heard anybody stand up in public and say they like rich people, have you? Well, one of the reasons is that's where the capital comes from that produces the jobs for all the rest of us. It's where the money comes from for our military. So rich people are very, very important to what it is that we do and to our society. How I got into pilot training, how I walked on for the football field at the Air Force Academy. And all that takes about 2 hours, and we're already 15 minutes behind schedule. And I've got to leave time for Mariana to talk to you about growing up under a brutal communist dictator in Romania for 20 years of her life. We talk about freedom. I've been fighting for freedom all of my adult life, but I don't really understand it. Only those who have lived without it understand what freedom really means. And then people ask, what have you learned after all these years since entering the Air Force Academy back in 1960? What are some of the lessons? And I came up with 5 lessons. My call sign is Cinco. 5's been a good number for me. And it's all common sense. It's all things that you know. It's the same lessons that everyone who's been down the road a few miles learns sooner or later. Let's just start with the transformation of Eldridge Cleaver. I doubt if anyone here knows that name. Was head of the Black Panthers in the 60s. Committed to the violent overthrow of the United States of America, Eldridge Cleaver. I mean, things seem to be in kind of rough shape these days with all of the divisions that are going on. Well, in the 60s and 70s, students, people were burning down buildings, burning down banks. It was chaos. And one of the leaders of that chaos was Eldridge Cleaver, leader of the Black Panthers, committed to the overthrow of the United States government. Well, he was indicted for a number of crimes. He left the United States. He was a committed communist, believed that communism was the future, the only future. So he went and lived in a dozen communist countries all over the world. And finally gave himself up to the American embassy in Paris and said, I'd rather be in jail in America than live in any communist country in the world. I heard him tell this in person in the mid-'80s in Phoenix at a National Speakers Association convention. Amazingly powerful story. And so then he entered a primary for the United States Senate in California as a Republican. Can you imagine that? The transformation of Eldridge Cleaver. He finally understood the meaning of freedom and what it takes to love it and cherish it and preserve it. And it's so important that you understand that lesson, probably more important than anything else. The Locker rescue one of the great rescue missions of all time. If you're interested, it takes me about 7 or 8 minutes to do it. And since we're behind schedule, I'm not going to do that today. But on YouTube, just look up my name and the Locker, Roger Locker, L-O-C-H-E-R, Roger Locker Rescue. I'm in this jacket at a Rotary Club near Orlando, Florida, and it's about 8 minutes. And it is one of the great stories of all time. One of the things it shows is what we will do in our military, the resources we will commit, the risks that we will take, the money that we will spend under incredibly difficult situations against all odds to go rescue one guy. Roger was down for 22 days, and we figured he'd been killed or captured. We made radio contact on the 23rd day, and General John Vogt, the commander of 7th Air Force, 4-star commander, fighter ace from World War II, the following day canceled the entire mission to Hanoi and dedicated all of the resources, including over 150 airplanes, to go get Roger Locker. And we went in and got him out and brought him home with no losses in one of the great missions of all time. And Roger was rescued on the 2nd of June, 1972. He'd been down for 23 days. 23 years later to the day, 2nd of June of 95. Another member of the Triple Nickel, a generation later in an F-16 out of Aviano, Italy, Captain Scott O'Grady, was shot down over Bosnia. And of course, maybe some of you know the rest of the story. Another total force, joint rescue victory. And by the way, those young Marines that went in on the final leg of that joint service rescue effort to pick up Air Force Captain Scott O'Grady, average age, 19 years old. How about a round for the Marines? We were with, a couple of days ago, we were with the Navy in Everett, Washington, with the Carrier Strike Group 11, Naval Academy graduate Admiral Don Gabrielson. Where's the Navy? Class of, 88, 89. And Strike Group 11, the Nimitz, one of the great names in our history. How many know the story of Admiral Nimitz? One of the great stories. And this is your flagship in the Navy, the oldest carrier. The Nimitz going to be replaced in about 4 years by the Kennedy, the John Kennedy. But when a carrier strike group, a carrier and a couple of destroyers, a few cruisers, depending on a lot of different things. When a carrier strike group arrives somewhere in the world, it gets people's attention. It is the power projection of the United States of America. It is the power of freedom. And we had one of the best days ever with the crew and the commanders from the Nimitz and the other ships of that strike group. We visited the Ralph Johnson, one of your newest destroyers. A tour of the Ralph Johnson, lunch on the Ralph Johnson. We had such a good time, I lost track of time, and we were due to be with Admiral Gabrielson and all of his commanders in another building 20 minutes away, and all of a sudden it's about 5 minutes until we're on. And so, but we had a 2-hour time frame, and then we spent another 4 hours at his home that night. And what the Navy does, I mean, I'm proud of the Air Force, and we do great work. But what goes on in a carrier battle group is unlike unlike anything else in the world. And so for the Navy folks who are here today, thank you very much for what you do. It is incredibly meaningful. It is very, very difficult. Someone asked me during the Q&A, who are better pilots, Air Force or Navy? I said Navy. And I meant it. I meant it. Because I have been fortunate enough to spend a week on the Reagan, and I had a F-18 ride off the Reagan. And we just don't do anything like that in the Air Force. What the Navy does on carrier flight operations is unlike anything in the world. And then you add night and you add the weather, the impossible is possible. And the Navy proves it every single day. We were at Texas A&M for Valentine's Day this year, 14th of February, addressed the Cadet Corps at Texas A&M. And they are probably the sharpest cadets in the country. I mean, look at them. Look at those uniforms. What an incredibly proud tradition and a proud bunch of people. And by the way, General Mark Welsh, the immediate past Chief of Staff of the Air Force, is the president of the Bush School for Government at Texas A&M. And he has 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter, all graduates of A&M. So you can imagine when they were looking at the resumes of who they were going to pick for the new dean of the Bush School, it was pretty good to have 4 kids who graduated from A&M, don't you think? Okay, the five things, the 5 summary points of all of these years and all of the experiences all over the world. Number 1, take advantage of every day. Take advantage of every day, not only to savor and enjoy and appreciate, but to prepare yourselves for the future. And you don't know what the future holds. And that's one of the exciting things about it, is that you don't know. And you must be prepared. You see, just about anyone with average ability, with dedication and hard work and preparation, can do great things. And it's amazing what you can do. If you just do the very, very best job that you can, and whatever job you're in at the time, whether you like it or not, do the very best job that you can, and things will work out. Number 2, treat people with dignity and respect. You know, if we could just do it. If we could just treat others the way we'd like to be treated, wouldn't it be a different world? I mean, it sounds so easy, doesn't it? It's so simple. It is so fundamental. And it is so difficult. Anybody know the name General Bob McDermott, especially the Air Force cadets here? Well, he was dean at the Air Force Academy for probably 30 years. He was a World War II bomber pilot. And then he was the football rep, the academic football rep at the Air Force Academy, and so all of the football team players got to know Joe McDermott, the dean, 1-star, very, very well. He retired from active duty after 35 years on active duty, became chairman of USAA. Anybody have USAA insurance? And General Bob McDermott built USAA into the great company that it is today. And when he retired about 10 or 15 years ago, people came from all over the world. He's so respected. Huge party in San Antonio, 1,000 people, all over the world. Incredible celebration, went on for several days. And the media asked Joe McDermott, what in the world is your secret? This magnificent success in combat, dean at the Air Force Academy, and then having built this magnificent company. You know what he said? He said, I've always tried to treat people the way I'd like to be treated. That's simple, folks. Why do we make it so difficult? Number three, teamwork. Obviously incredibly important. There's no way that I could have flown over Hanoi by myself and survived, much less downed enemy airplanes. About 4 or 5% of us in the Air Force are pilots. Our job is to fly, fight, and win, but only about 5% of us are pilots. Only about 1% of us are combat fighter pilots. It takes that 96, that 99% to make it possible for us to do what we do. And I can tell you, without tens of thousands of people in the entire military and civilian support community who were proud of their work and performed it in a professional, outstanding manner, Steve Ritchie would not be a fighter race, and I probably would not be alive. And then number 4, I would say, let's not take ourselves too seriously. You know people like that? Think they're such big shots? Most of them are here in D.C. Take themselves so seriously, think they're so important. Well, it was President Lincoln, talking about power. Because in every leadership position, there is some degree of power, right? He said, the true test of leadership is not only how you use power, but how it uses you. The true test of leadership. Think about that in your leadership positions now, and then in the much more important leadership positions that you will have in the future. The true test of leadership is not only how you use power, but how it uses you. And then number 5, our word is our bond. You know, if our word is not good, what else is there? What else is there if our word is not good? Did you know that all of the surveys show that about 70% of high school students admit that they cheat on a regular basis? And what's even worse is that almost half of them don't think there's anything wrong with it. A survey about 10 years ago at the Air Force Academy revealed that 30-some% of cadets had admitted that they had cheated during their 4 years at the Air Force Academy. That probably meant 40 or 50% was the real number. Ladies and gentlemen, our word is our bond. And it is how we conduct ourselves when no one else is looking, when no one's going to find out, that defines who we are, that truly defines who we are. All right. Let me try to squeeze in that lesson that Dad taught when I was 9 years old. I told my daddy when I was 9 years old, I had decided that if I could get a car when I was 16, I'd be set. I'd be set for life. I don't know if any of you felt that way, but that's the way I felt. So I told my dad when I was 9 years old, I said, Daddy, I want a car when I'm 16. He said, that's fine, son. All you got to do is buy it. I got my little rear end to work, and when I was 16 years old in 1958, I bought a 55 Ford Crown Victoria with 15,000 miles, almost new, for $1,500. A lot of money for a 16-year-old in 1958. I was so proud of that car. I loved that car so much. I took such good care of that car. I paid for almost all the gas and oil and insurance maintenance that ever went into it. I owned it. I owned it. Now, would I have been quite as proud of that car if somebody had given it to me? Ladies and gentlemen, ownership. Ownership is one of the keys to our way of life. Because under the system that Mariana is going to tell you about, there wasn't private ownership of many things. The state controlled almost everything that happened. There was a long, long waiting list to get a car, and then it wasn't anything that you'd be proud to drive. And there wasn't much gas. Ownership is one of the great keys to a free society. Okay, we're going to try to catch up a little bit on the time. I really wish I could do the normal program. I think you'll find it worthwhile to look up the Roger Locker Rescue on YouTube. It tells so much about who we are as a nation. I don't believe there's another nation on earth that would spend so much money and commit so many resources under such great risk to go get one person. One person. I'll tell you, the communists wouldn't do it. There's no question about it. Let me tell you this right quick about Jim Inhofe. Jim Inhofe, the senior senator from Oklahoma. Anybody from Oklahoma? You know Jim Inhofe? You know the name? Sir. So he was the mayor of Tulsa in the late 70s when I was working for the Adolph Coors Company in Golden, Colorado. Aside from the beer, it was a terrific job. And I was speaking at the Tulsa Rotary Club. And Jim Inhofe was the mayor of Tulsa, and he had 5 minutes on the program before I did my 15 or 20 minutes. And Jim basically stood up and said, if you people in Tulsa want me to, he was on his way to the National Mayor's Conference being held here in the swamp. He said, if you folks in Tulsa want me to go to Washington and beg for federal money for Tulsa, Oklahoma, you better get yourself another mayor. I thought that was the most courageous political statement I've ever heard. And of course, he went on to become member of Congress and senator, and one of the great senators. He's still an aviator. He's still flying in his 80s. Jim Inhofe is an aviator who's flown all of his life and still flying airplanes. And the Fighter Aces received the Congressional Gold Medal about 4 years ago. Jim Inhofe was one of the sponsors, and I couldn't have been more proud. That first photo that came up showed the gold medal. To have Jim Inhofe present me with the Congressional Gold Medal. 8th of July, 1972, when we downed 2 MiG-21s in 1 minute and 29 seconds. Gosh, I wish I had time to tell you that. So many tremendous lessons from that story. But it really is more important that we hear from someone who has lived under a brutal communist dictator, yearning for freedom. Hoping that someday the Americans might come to set them free. You need the water, honey? You need the water?
At first sight, I'm just a general's little wife. But beyond that, I am the oppressed that you rescued, America, and the American who fights alongside you to keep our freedom from slipping through our fingers. I come from Romania, a communist Romania and a very oppressed Romania. While American children were learning to love and trust themselves, we learned to hate, trust no one, control every word we said because our life depended on it. We waited in line for hours for a piece of bread, sometimes even water. The communists believed in spreading the wealth, take from the ones who had and give to the poor. And that paralyzed the economy because the ones who worked didn't want to work when it was all taken away from them. The poor didn't want to work because they were getting something for nothing. And that only lasted until they ran out of other people's money. Guns were illegal because unarmed people are so much easier to control and oppress. The socialist healthcare killed many. Imagine having a root canal without anesthetic. The nurses would hold you down, and the dentist would work on you, and then if they needed more people, they would call the patients from the waiting room to help them hold you down. My first memory, one of my first memories as a child, was holding the hand of a dying man who was a friend and a neighbor, and my grandma crying, saying, "There's nothing more we can do but help him die." I can still feel his hand getting cold and stiff in my hand, and I remember thinking how quickly it happened. When I asked my grandma how old I was at that time, she said I was 5 years old. All this man needed was a simple surgery that here in America is an outpatient surgery. There he was left to die. He was considered too old to be saved, and he was only in his 60s. Knowing that my grandfather was a priest, I was threatened with all kinds of things for going to church. And that made me go to church even more, and it was not courage. It was desperation. I wanted to provoke the communists so they can come and get me, get it done and over with, because life without freedom was not worth living. We needed approval from the government to move from one city to another, to get married, to get a landline. It would take years to get a landline. Communism is such an evil system. I'm amazed that after decades of the Cold War, here in America, we're still debating whether maybe we could have a better communism. Maybe we can actually get something for nothing. And to say that, it's just like saying that here in America, we can get a better cancer. How do you do that? It's evil, it's corrupt, it doesn't work. Please don't even think about it. It will save you a lot of heartache, suffering, and pain. As an escape, I had a picture of the American flag that I cut out from a foreign magazine smuggled into the country. And at times I would take it out and dream of America. Dream of what it would be like to be free, to walk in Central Park, to what a hamburger tastes like, or cheesecake. And I made a mistake to take it to school with me, and the teacher was trying, someone told on me, and the teacher came trying to take the flag away from me. And I knew it was going to be destroyed. And in spite of all the threats, I did not surrender the American flag because I knew it was going to be destroyed. And I couldn't care whether I lived or died. But I could not go on living without that hope that the American flag, the symbol of freedom, was giving me. And I did not surrender it. And years later, we're in America, and I watch certain Americans burn the American flag, the flag I was going to die for. And that hurt more than anything else that has been done to us under communism. I realize it's not against the law to destroy the American flag, but as far as I'm concerned, it ought to be, because it's the most precious thing in the world, not only to us here, but to oppressed people from all over the world. As a little girl, I did not dream of Prince Charming coming on a white horse to carry me off to his castle. I knew instinctively that I needed a lot more than that. I needed an American fighter pilot that would come, blow up everything in his path, and then fly me to America in a fighter jet. And I'm the luckiest woman alive to be able to find him and spend the rest of my life with him. You hear all these negative things about Vietnam, how Americans died for nothing. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because with every move Americans made in Vietnam, we behind the Iron Curtain felt the Soviet grip lose its strength. And that gave us time to breathe and stay alive. And because you kept the Soviets busy in Vietnam, they spread themselves too thin. And they lost track of us. And there's no more evil empire, thanks to you. We grew up dreaming that Americans are gonna come to blow us up. Blow up every brick, every wall, every board until there was nothing left standing. Because we were part of a system so evil and so corrupt that we didn't feel we were worth saving. And we would have gladly given the Americans anything in exchange for freedom. All the gold in the mountains, the oil in Romania, our heart and soul. By the time we came to America, we were numb. We were not dead, but we've never really been alive either. And we came through New York, and the airplane, when it got close to New York, I will never forget the New York skyline with the Twin Towers and the Statue of Liberty. Such a dream come true. And then suddenly the airplane's flying away from New York, and I panicked. I believed the communists who were playing these mind games, I believed them evil enough to bring us close to New York only to take us right back. And I was not gonna go back. So I unbuckled the seatbelt, I looked for the closest emergency exit door, and I was trying to figure out how I'm gonna be able to open it before they can stop me so I can jump. Because I'd rather be dead in America than live under communism ever again. And luckily, the airplane landed. And with every step that we took from that airplane was a step from a life that we dreaded into a life that we've been cherishing ever since. We went overnight from hell to heaven, from slavery to freedom, from depression to happiness. And we had nothing. We came with a bag of clothes, but for the first time in our lives, we had something priceless. We had freedom. And New York was everything we ever imagined and more. All the shiny skyscrapers, the fancy cars, the food. There was more food in the pet aisle than there was in my whole hometown. The shoes, the diamonds, it was incredible. And we were not envious, because all those riches were a promise that someday we can have all that. And we do in the most incredible way. Anything's possible in America. If you can't find what you're looking for here, it's not going to be anywhere else. But you have the wonderful freedom to go and try it. And we felt like we lived 100 lives 100 times and cried 1,000 tears 1,000 times. We were broken, lost, and worn out. And you took us in at a time when nobody wanted us. And you gave us a second chance to life, to a life worth living. And you taught us the meaning of new words like happiness and kindness and honor. Americans are the kindest people in the world. And in spite of what you may hear from the media, Americans are loved all over the world, and Americans are the best. And what makes Americans the best above everybody else is the fact that they go out there and fight for other people's freedom, and they never ask for anything in exchange. And you never hear a thank you. You never even meet those people. So now I would like to put a face to the oppressed from all over the world and say thank you. Thank you for everything you've done, you're doing, and you will be doing for not only us here, but all over the world. There are millions of people out there who are hoping you're going to go rescue them next. And the oppressed knows better than anyone that sometimes the rescuers have to do whatever they have to do in order to free them. And it's okay. The oppressed never blames the rescuers for anything. Keep that in mind if you're ever in combat. America is mankind's longing for itself, and I think Americans came as close as humanly possible to finding this ideal. God bless you, and God bless America.
We don't have time for questions. We're back on schedule now, right?
Let's take a couple of questions while they set up the stage.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that inspiring message, an important message. With greatness comes responsibility. That was what Winston Churchill once said to a graduating class at Harvard University. Shortly after, actually it was during the war. We must never forget the responsibility that each and every one of us already have. If you wear the uniform, if you wear a uniform now, you have responsibility. You need to be able to and take pride in stepping up to that responsibility. We're going to have about 5 minutes as we reset the stage. If anyone has any questions for General Ritchie, we'd love to have that opportunity to entertain, or for Mariana. Any questions? Anybody got a question out there? Well, I will have one.
One here.
Oh, good. I think there's a mic
Can't
coming
hear
your
you.
way, but maybe not. So
Just holler out. Come on.
Sir, obviously you've flown several different platforms in your time. What was your favorite part of flying, and what was your favorite platform to fly?
F-104 Starfighter. And the airplane was built in the late 50s, designed by Kelly Johnson. Anybody know the name? The great airplane designer, designed the SR-71, the U-2, the F-104. So the 104 in the late 50s was the first airplane to hold the world's speed, altitude, and time to climb record all at the same time. Speed was over 1,400 miles an hour, altitude about 100,000 feet, and time to climb from brake release to 40,000 feet in about 2 minutes. And I graduated from pilot training in 1965 and was assigned to Eglin Air Force Base as a second lieutenant in the F-104. I got to do that with about 200 hours of flying time. That was maybe one of the highlights of a fabulous career that I've had in terms of flying the best handling airplane. So I flew it for 2 years, and then 40 years later, a friend of mine had been able to acquire 3 F-104s. And I ended up getting certified by the FAA, all 3 of us did, and got a type rating. You know what a type rating is? Well, yeah, it's an FAA certification to fly an airplane. So in order to fly these civilian within numbers, F-104, at air shows, we had to be qualified by the FAA and get a type rating in the airplane. Well, there was no one in the FAA, no check pilots that had any F-104 time, so they selected John Penny, and you're going to hear Heather, John's daughter, tomorrow night. It's tomorrow night, right, at the banquet?
Yes.
Heather Penny will be here. She's the one who, with her commander, took the 2 F-16s on 9/11 and would have rammed the jet that was supposedly coming for the Capitol or the White House. So you'll be hearing from Heather Penny. Well, her dad is type rated in more airplanes than anybody in the world. If you're familiar with the Reno air races, he's won Reno several times in Rare Bear. So they selected John Penny because he was type rated in so many different types of airplanes to give us our check ride, and we got checked out and qualified. And it was 40 years later, to the month, that I got recertified to fly the F-104. and flew air shows in '07 and '08. Flew the Andrews Air Show on the 17th of May here in '08, 10 years ago. 3 ship of F-104s, and I've got a great photo right here of us making a pass at 300 feet and 400 knots. I'm in the middle, flying number 2, with 2 former Navy guys on each side. So how about that? Now the Phantom, of course, which I flew in combat, was a multi-purpose. It did a lot of good things. It didn't do any of them great, but it did a lot of stuff, and you know, it was a Navy airplane. It was a Navy, and a great airplane for the time. We made it a little better. I tell you, this is a dead crowd today, isn't it? Maybe it's a dead speaker. You got it. So anyway, and then a few rides in the F-15, the F-16, and the most exciting non-combat flight of my entire life was that F-18 ride off the aircraft carrier Reagan. Oh my goodness, there's just nothing like it. You guys in the Navy have really got this aviation thing down. Anything else? Wish we had more time. Wish I could have given the normal talk that I've done over 5,500 times the last 40 years. I did a good part of it at A&M at the ROTC.
Thank you, General Ritchie.
You bet.